So allow me to introduce you on behalf of the Peoria Area World Affairs Council. Welcome. We look forward to learning from you. Mr. Santos is a native-born Filipino. He emigrated to Chicago in 1970 and lives in Skokie. He is a registered architect, so he's by profession, he's an architect. However, he has extensive other experience that I think is perhaps even more interesting for our conversation tonight. He was the managing editor of the Philippines Times from 1975 to 1977, the new bureau chief of the Philippine News from 1984 to 86, and publisher and editor of Pinoy News Magazine from 2000 to present. He is the first chairman of the National Committee for the Restoration of Civil Liberties in the Philippines. He is the Central USA Area Commander of the Knights of Rizal, and perhaps you can tell us about your national hero a little bit. But for tonight's conversation, I think, for me at least, he is also very active in advocating for human rights, press freedom, and in the reduction of poverty in Philippines. And so we would love to hear what you think about your recent election and your hopes for the new administration of Philippines under, can I say that the new administration under the old family? How do you feel? What do you think?
Okay, so well, anyway, you asked me about the Knights of Rizal. Jose Rizal is our national hero who was shot to death in 1896 by the Spanish colonial rulers, and at the age of 35, he wrote a couple of novels, No Le Metangere and El Filibusterismo. Two books that are being given the credit of inspiring the revolution against the Spanish colonizer. Of course, as we know, the United States had taken over the Philippines in 1898 when they defeated the Spanish Armada at the Manila Bay, May 1st, 1898. And subsequently, on June 12, 1898, the Filipinos had declared their independence. But for some reason, through the Treaty of Paris, the U.S. paid $22 billion for the Philippines to the Spanish, and they have taken over the colonial rule in the Philippines, and we were under the Americans until July 4th, 1946, right after the war. And so we are a republic since July 4th of 1946, I should say. And so our system of government is pretty much patterned after the United States. We have the executive branch, and that's the election that we just had recently on May 9. And then, of course, there were also 12 senators at large that were elected on that election. That is the legislative branch, of course. And then we have also the Supreme Court. It's pretty much patterned after the United States, except the fact that when we elect our president, there is no electoral college. The Philippines being just one, like equivalent to one state, you know. So we had that recent election that brought back Ferdinand Marcos Jr., age 63, the only son of our late dictator Ferdinand Marcos, who was ousted in 1896 in a people's power and was exiled in Hawaii until 1991 when his body, he died there, and when his body was brought back to the Philippines. And as we probably know, most of the interesting facts about the downfall of Marcos, the 14th year of his dictatorship, That is when he declared martial law 1972, and he was ousted in 1896. That's 14 years. But he was a regular president based on an election that happened in 1965. And he was reelected 1969. And by 1972, he proclaimed himself as dictator. So we went, Corazon Aquino took over as president of the Philippines in 1986. The new constitution is the one being followed, and his son, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., was elected based on that constitution. One term, 6 years, unlike before when his father was elected in 1965, when he is elected for 4-year term with the right to be re-elected for another term of 4 years. But that has changed by the 1986 Constitution. So that's where we are now. And the recent election is like none other. The two-party system that we used to have has been changed by the new constitution, just like you can just, before there are usually two parties contending, just like the Republican and the Democrats. And back then there's the Nationalist Party, and the Liberal Party. But compared that to the last election, for instance, we have 10 candidates, okay? And they have, name it, they have a name for their party, you can just imagine. But actually those 10 were whittled down from those who are aspiring to be president, from those who filed candidacy last year, from 98. And so they got vetted by the Commission on Election, and they were whittled down to 10. Okay, and principal among them, of course, is the winner, Ferdinand Marcos, and then the incumbent president, Leni Robredo, who placed second in this last election, is the current vice president whose term is ending with that of the current president, Rodrigo Duterte, on June 30, when Ferdinand Marcos Jr. will take over. And what has changed also before, it's just like the Democrats and the Republicans, when you vote for your president, you also get his vice president. But now, candidates for the presidency and candidates for the vice presidency are being elected separately. So a president doesn't guarantee that his teammate will be his vice president. And it has happened a lot in the last 20 years or 30 years, almost. So, but in this case, finally, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who is commonly known as Bongbong, Bongbong Marcos, got his teammate elected with him, Sara Duterte, who is the daughter of the incumbent president. So, and in the election after 1986, the winner hardly had been garnering more than 50%. But in this case, Bongbong Marcos was elected with 58% of the votes, So it's a clear majority. Before, because of the number of candidates, like for instance, the successor of Corazon Aquino in 1991 got elected with only 27% of the vote. There is no kind of a majority rule. That's why when you get 27 and that's it, you are the president.
There's no runoff election or anything like that. It's just whoever gets the most votes wins the presidency.
Yeah. Unlike here, if you didn't have the 50 plus 1%, you have to go to the polls again and
Right.
get that number. Yeah. So this election, I'm quite sure that's why we are here tonight, is the fact that how in the world a son of a notorious dictator and the Guinness Book of Record have given them the infamous distinction of the biggest thieves, running away with something equivalent to about more than $10 billion in loot, when they left office. That almost bankrupted the Philippine economy. It took about almost 10 years for the Philippines to repay all these external debts, because of the corruption that happened during the 14 year of dictatorship. And of course, he is also cited for his gross human rights violation, the extrajudicial killing under his regime, when there were about 12,000 political prisoners and approximately 3,000 that were killed. Okay. Now, Bongbong Marcos actually has still a case before our Supreme Court because of the question about his qualification, because he was convicted actually of tax evasion when he was age 23, when they were still in power in 1982, when he was elected in the home province of his dad, Ferdinand Marcos Sr. in Ilocos Norte. He was elected vice governor, and apparently retroactively they found out that he was not paying his taxes in 1982, 83, 84. So in 1995 he was convicted of not paying his taxes at the time. It was appealed. It was a long circuitous case, but in 1991 it came to, the final verdict was that he was guilty. It reached the Supreme Court, and that's why, based on that being a convicted felon, so to speak, he's being questioned why he's running for president, because he should be qualified to run. But he did run and win big, and so his spokesperson is saying the people that is spoken, so that disqualification should be thrown out. That is their argument. But the Supreme Court has yet to speak. But we don't bet so much that anything good will happen on that disqualification case. I think Mr. Marcos will serve his term, barring any extraneous external circumstances. He will be our next president in the next 6 years, because the Supreme Court is packed with Duterte's appointees, all of them. And then the COMELEC, the Commission of Elections, are all Duterte's men. And in fact, the lawyer for the COMELEC is a close relative of Mr. Marcos. That's the way it goes in the Philippines. So if you have any question, I've been giving you some background. Just maybe it's better if you ask specific questions, and we can make this more kind of interesting, so to speak.
Sure. And I invite, we have a small group tonight, so if anybody wants to, unmute yourself and turn your camera on to ask a question, please do. I do have a couple of questions. So would you say that the newly elected Bongbong Marcos is closely affiliated with Duterte? Are they similar in their projected plans for how they plan to be president of Philippines, or did the people choose somebody very different from Duterte?
Uh, I think it's expected that Mr. Marcos would more or less kind of carry on the policies of the outgoing president. You know, he had already made a lot of statements to that effect, uh, and his economic policies, which are very unclear because he never laid out policies during the campaign. He never participated on those presidential debates, so not much is known about it because it seems like he was handed like just repeat the mantra vote for unity, and actually he sounded so positive. I think he hit the nail on people who are so tired of the negativity of the pandemic years. So he sounded like he's above kind of negative campaign. He used that mantra in addition to the known social media, thanks to Cambridge Analytica, that we wrote all the history of his dad's regime and the history of the Philippines, putting them in a good light. So, well, anyway, Duterte and Marcos actually before last year, he was only polling around not more than 25% in the poll, but Duterte's daughter, Sara Duterte, who succeeded President Duterte as mayor of the southern province in the Philippines, in Davao City, a big city in the southern Philippines, kind of decided not to run for president and ran instead as vice president under the banner of Marcos. Those kind of put them above the 50% in the polling number. So they were able to pull it to this election because of the combined forces. And so, and they have a lot of things going on for them because, first of all, the International Court of Justice is hot on the trail of the incumbent Rodrigo Duterte because of the about 25,000 extrajudicial killings that they were allegedly being that were allegedly committed by Duterte and his minions in his drug war in the Philippines in the last 6 years. So it's to the advantage of Rodrigo Duterte to have her daughter to be the vice president and Marcos as president. Duterte's dad was a official under the Marcos dictatorship, and for many years the Filipinos had considered the late Ferdinand Marcos as he is, the dictator who did a lot of havoc in the Philippines. And so they refused to have him buried on the equivalent to the Arlington Heights, Arlington Cemetery, where heroes are being buried. But the first thing that Duterte did when he took over in 2016 was to Marcos was in a crypt in his province, repatriated, not being buried, because Imelda Marcos wants her husband to be buried in the cemetery of the heroes. That is a cemetery in Manila that it used to be called Port McKinley, after our President William McKinley. And it was converted into what you call in Tagalog, Libingan ng mga Bayani, and translated the cemetery for national heroes. So finally, when Duterte took over, he showed his partisanship by not listening to the people's complaint about burying Marcos in that cemetery. He buried him there, he just gave a hint on what's going to be next for the Philippines. It will be a team, a partnership between the two dynasties, the Dutertes and the Marcoses. And that kind of, paved the way for the resurrection of this disgraced family. Now it's big time again for the Marcos family.
So it sounds like not much will change then for Philippines under Marcos than under the previous, under Duterte. Are the people, well, 58% indicates that the people were happy with Duterte. We outside of Philippines, perhaps less happy with his extrajudicial killings and his really hard stance for human rights issues. But the people of the Philippines voted for Marcos, and it sounds like they understood quite clearly that the two families would be side by side. What does that mean for the Philippines? Will it be much of the same going forward, or are there hopes that Marcos will perhaps moderate a bit and not be quite so heavy-handed as Duterte was?
We are not betting so much on that because there is so much the baggage on the part of the Marcos family to kind of not for most of us, well, at least those who follow the affairs, social affairs, or the social events in the Philippines, for those who do some, which is important for all of us, even here, about some critical thinking. We are not hoping much because it seems like these 6 years are mostly to kind of make up for the lost time in protecting their interests. And you see, in the Senate, for instance, there most of all who are there are oligarchs, like Amy Marcos, the sister, is a senator. The speaker, the one who will be the new speaker of the lower house is Romualdez, as in Imelda Romualdez, that is a real family name. So he's a close relative. Even, in fact, even our Philippine ambassador here in Washington is Romualdez, and most of those senators are actually pro-Dutertes. Those are men that were endorsed by Duterte. So in terms of, as they say it, these people, they run not to do things good for national benefit. They are there to see that no law is passed that are inimical to their interests. And that's just the situation when there is a very weak middle class, as it is in the Philippines. The gap between the wealth, the economic gap between the have and the have-nots is so wide that people, as we say, who support the president, ironically, just for instance in the drug war, Duterte never solved the drug war because he never went after those who manufacture and the one who the kingpins or drug kingpins that got rich, but he just eliminated the user on the down, those like the foot soldiers of the prison captains who kind of followed their captains in dispensing or selling drugs, money that actually being used in campaigns, And so when the Duterte would like to brag that he's doing something about it, he kills those on the bottom, the very bottom, in the bottom pole of the drug empire, So as we start with this new administration, it's actually the drug war is a sham, It's all the same, except the fact that there are 30,000 poor people who got killed, you know. We have a lot of good documentary on our PBS, for instance, on Frontline about the drug war in the Philippines. They are still available probably in your library. And you can just see how, you know, like when the police do a raid on a drug, supposedly a drug raid, they are always the funeral director on the take is already riding with the with the police car. You know, it's so bizarre. You know.
So what does that mean for the future of human rights? I mean, what kinds of progress can you foresee, or barriers to improved human rights for the average person in the Philippines?
There is a commission on human rights, but now it's under the domain of Duterte as well. So there's not much to hope for from this commission. But of course, the International Court of Justice and the European Union Human Rights Commission, they are hot on the trail of Duterte. Just too bad, you know, he got some extra protection with the election of Bongbong Marcos, but should have a different one got elected. He knows that he has something to kind of watch from behind, you know. But like, for instance, one senator who is in jail right now, named Laila de Lima, was the chairman of the Commission of Human Rights under the regime of Benigno Aquino Jr., the immediate predecessor of Duterte. Right. And because of her kind of diligence about going after Duterte when he was mayor of this Davao City in southern Philippines, of the EGK, the extrajudicial killing that he had done, he made sure that upon his assumption of power in 2016, he produced a lot of fake cases against Laila de Lima that saw her going to jail in 2017. And she is still there. And early this year, 3 of the witnesses recant their testimony against her, saying that they were just coerced to manufacture stories against the senator, and they recanted. That's why our senators here, about 6 senators, U.S. senators, are demanding for the immediate release of Senator Laila de Lima, whose advocacy for human rights is so exemplary, you know. But just the same, she's still inside jail, you know, until now. She ran for re-election in this last election, but unfortunately, being in jail, she was not able to get re-elected. It's so difficult for her. She did not have the funds, and she could not get out and campaign, you know. Yeah. So there is not much to. It's kind of bleak. That's why the only thing that we get very hopeful in the campaign of Vice President Leni Robredo, it never happened. You know, the people's power that the world saw in 1986, when everyone, the focus of the world press was in the Philippines. That was in Manila, when people went out. The Catholic Church led people's power, you know, when that led to the exit of the Marcoses to Hawaii, you know, when Reagan took them as exile. President Reagan took them as an exile, you know. But this time, you know, because of the fact that the people saw that Ferdinand Jr. was tapping the polls, then there is a great possibility that he will get elected president. the people everywhere, not just in the Philippines, but internationally, here in Chicago, there was a strong replica of this people's power. In the Philippines, major city coming out, every rally of Leni Robredo, where people are numbering like 200,000, you know, and that used to be the number in Manila when Marcos was deposed, but it's all over the Philippines. But even in the United States, major cities, overseas Filipinos came out campaigning for Leni Duterte, but it came in too late. Leni Duterte only announced his candidacy last November. It came in too late but remember, Robredo, the vice president, defeated Bongbong Marcos in 2016. Bongbong Marcos ran for vice president, but in the count, both of them are won up on the top with the difference of about 600,000 in favor of Leni Robredo. Marcos protested. In the recount, Leni Robredo was confirmed as the true winner. But since then, in 2016, Marcos consciously employed social media trollers, you know, writing a new story, narrative about his family, calling the bankrupt regime of his dad as the golden years in the economic life of the Philippines, that we are a leading country in Asia. All false, yeah. But this is all being fed on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and everything and they're using their money. And I'm quite sure they have a lot of money stashed away to use all this. So it's a history being rewritten. And you see, the new generation are very vulnerable on, as they say, the number one texting country in the world is the Philippines. They like to be on social media. And the thing is that with our educational system, yeah, we have English as a medium, but our education budget, for instance, is a pittance compared to that of the United States. So you can just imagine what kind of the quality of education that people get from their schooling. So so they are so susceptible to imbibe on falsehood. And that was just what happened. Because in 2016, Leni Robredo got 14 million, and close to that is also Bongbong. So we say about 14 million each. How come in this election, with all these things going on for Robredo, for support, I will admit that probably mostly for those educated and middle class, she remained 14 million, and Marcos won up with 31 million. That's more than twice what he got last in 6 years, you know. So the statistical improbability of this election is so astounding. And so it's very difficult for us Filipinos on the north to accept it, really, you know.
So what is your press freedom like? So so Filipinos like social media a lot, which is an issue in the United States as well. If you get all of your information from social media, it's usually short, it's not in depth, and it's often one-sided, depending on what side you're on.
Well,
but what is your press freedom like?
Well, they said that, again, they said that we have the freest press in Asia, which is kind of very ironic to get that title, because if you remember Maria Ressa, who won the Nobel Prize for journalism, she is one bold journalist who got too much in trouble. There are about 11 cases slapped by the Duterte regime against her everything with the threat of long-term jail. The Rappler is being harassed. The ABS-CBN, which is a very popular TV broadcast in the Philippines, was closed arbitrarily and was taken over by a Duterte partisan. And there are a few newspapers, but most of the newspapers back home are owned by Duterte supporters, you know. Like, for instance, the paper that I subscribe to for news back home, the Philippine Daily Inquirer, has been in a lot of trouble because of their coverage being true to the tenet of true journalism. They are always in trouble with the regime. So, yeah, it's a reflection. It's not only, as we say, it's not only a reflection in the Philippines, but we know this is also happening. You know, of course, the most obvious example is Russia. You know, and the rise of the strongman rule. You know, we saw that the populist rise of it's something. It's good that we are talking about this in the United States, but because if we are not vigilant, we wake up one day that we might be just like our country, a third world feudal country.
So do you, as a Filipino American, do you have any fear of returning? I'm assuming you still have family. Do you visit Philippines regularly?
I did. I was in the Philippines just right after there was a lockdown in February of 2020. That's the last time I was in the Philippines.
So do you have any fear going back there?
My fear is that, of course, Duterte, you know, notwithstanding the fact that 30,000 EGKs, extrajudicial killings, are being attributed to him, he's not obviously very repressive as Marcos. When I was here, you know, my personal story is that I came here in 1970 on the hope that in 3 years I'll go back with a master's degree in urban planning and policy. But, you know, and then martial law was declared and I got drawn out in the anti-martial law movement and I got blacklisted. And every so often the Consul General, Ambassador Sanchez here will go on TV calling me Mariano Santos, the communist. And so I was blacklisted, and for a while I could not go home to the Philippines, you know. But it's not happening that way. But hopefully it doesn't return. But who knows, you know? Who knows? Whoever kind of predicted that the only son of the dictator will be our president in 30 days.
It is a strange world. So I would like to invite, again, if anybody's got a question, just unmute yourself. Larry, looks like you're getting ready to ask something. I think you have to unmute, Larry.
Yeah, I was just curious. I visited the Philippines many years ago with Caterpillar, and at the time I was impressed with how many people were in Manila. I mean, it seemed busier than even places like New York and Chicago when I was visiting there. So I looked up the population of the Philippines, and it's right around 112 million, if I'm correct. So yeah. looking at it in terms of how many people are really participating in the election process within the Philippines, is it a high percentage, or you know that you're talking about the surprise of some of these people getting elected, but I was wondering how many people actually participate in those elections.
The stats is giving 75 million registered voters, and we were told that 80% of them went to the polls in this last election. That's a very high percentage.
Oh, yeah.
And so, yeah, Mr. Marcos, for instance, got 31 million plus in this last election. And Vice President Robredo had gotten again a little over 14 million. And the other 8 presidential candidates got portions of the rest, you know.
Mhm. Those are really high percentages, even when you compare to the United States, some of
Yes.
our voting, actually.
Yeah, one thing about this is that there is, here you go to the polls quiet, like we listen to the debate, and then, you know, in the Philippines, it's almost like a festival every day with all the posters, with all the rallies, with all the vote buying, you know, and everyone just, it's a holiday, by the way, on, it's a holiday, a non-working day on election day. You know, there is so much going on to generate so much interest, not forgetting the fact that money, campaign money, you know, is flowing like money is getting out of style.
Same as here in the United States, I think.
Yeah.
But there is more blatant, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. So yeah, I think by comparison, even in the 2020 election that was so hotly contested and according to some people still being contested, in the United States, our voter turnout was still lower than 60%. I think it was something like 56 or 57% of the eligible voters actually voted. And it was a record turnout.
Yes.
So 80% in Philippines is quite impressive. So
Yes, indeed it is, you know, and unfortunately doesn't mean much, you know, because, you know, you could already say that it's really, you know, it's almost a sham democratic processes, considering, you know, especially now it was made worse by social media. And there's no money because the Marcoses, certainly they have billions to squander, you know. Because those are not turned over to the Commission on Good Government. They were very good in hiring smart lawyers on how to retain, you know. In fact, in one of the photos during the election, the Imelda was shown, and one of those, some of the most expensive paintings that they are looking for, because she likes to buy very expensive impressionists, Picassos. They saw a Picasso right behind her, the one that they're looking for. Now, the people are saying now she does this. She plumbed her loot without any conscience now, because she knows she will be protected by her son.
So from a global perspective, that's an interesting point you bring up, because I was looking at the news today, and the story I read said that, you know, the global economy, looking at Philippines, is feeling a little relief because the newly elected President Marcos is going to be filling his government with some of the previous presidents' ministers and leaders, especially in the economy. So there'll be some continuity in the economy. So while that might give the global economy, you know, some peace of mind, does that really help the people of the Philippines? I mean, you know, just because he's appointing people from the previous administration, if they were corrupt because they, you know, came up from other administrations that were also corrupt, is that a relief to the people of Philippines? Do they feel like, well, you know, at least we're going to have some continuity, or are they resigned to, there's not much we can do about it?
No, we are hoping that the economic condition will will be better for most of the people because the poverty has gone bad again because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And Morgan Stanley actually came out with they say, that the investors are leery about putting their investment in the Philippines again because of the election of Marcos. And they knew, because they remember what happened with their money when the dad was the president.
Mhm.
The Philippines, when he was kicked out of power, the Philippines was on the brink of bankruptcy.
Yeah.
The IMF was knocking on the door, demanding to get paid, but the government of Cora Aquino, you have to restructure. We have no money to pay you back, and then on this one, because in the 6 years, they know where the kickback is coming from public works, and Duterte went on a building bins in the Philippines, building roads and all that, from the loan being freely given by the Chinese, it's a Chinese capital. So the external debt of the Philippines is enormously very, very high, almost kind of 30% more of when Mr. Aquino left office 6 years ago. So this is the scenario that is being left to Bongbong Marcos, who, by the way, never spelled out his economic policy. And then what's more important probably in the US is that Duterte, during his 6 years, notwithstanding the fact that the UNCLOS, the United Nations Rule on Seas, said that the West Philippine Sea or the South China Sea, in the terms of the Chinese, there are a lot of rich in minerals islands there that are owned by the Philippines within the territorial limits that defined by the United Nations Treaty, and that was acknowledged by the UN court in Europe. But Duterte, for most part, kind of telegraphed to the Chinese, it's okay, I won't enforce that. And many statements were given by Mr. Marcos towards the conclusion of the election campaign, telegraphing the message to the Chinese government that he will just continue that policy of Duterte. That bodes very badly for us, especially for the United States, because that sea lane has to remain free, that the West Philippine Seas or the South China Sea. That's why when President Xi quickly congratulated Marcos after just a few hours of counting, it seems like our President Biden has no choice but kind of come out, and despite the cloud on the numbers of the election, he has to also send his congratulations to Marcos, because I don't know, this is international kind of.
It's a tightrope, that's for certain. Philippines is in a difficult neighborhood with China next door, but those valuable minerals and potential resources that could come from those territorial waters,
I think
would go a long way toward helping Philippines.
Yeah, about 25% of trade, I think, passes through that sea lane.
So
there's so much. And for the Filipinos, especially as they say, as we say here, most of us are dual citizens. That's why we can vote actually in the Philippines. You vote here in the US election and you get so much stress hearing about the problem, and then you vote in the Philippines, double the stress. You get the pandemic, and then you watch the TV and you see Zelensky griping on Putin. These are not the best times.
Now, globally, this is a challenging time, that's for certain. So,
Yeah.
well,
So
we've come to the end of the hour, unless anybody has one last question. I want to thank you for joining us.
well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, we don't talk about Philippines a lot in this country, and the Philippines are a very important neighbor. We have a great deal of history, good and
Yes.
bad.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so it's
Because
important for us to learn about what's going on. So,
yeah, we've been the only colony of the United States. The Philippines.
yeah, and
Yeah.
so it's important for us not to forget how important our relationship is. So,
Yeah.
Larry, did you have one more question? No, okay, all right. So on behalf of the Peoria Area World Affairs Council, I want to thank you, Mr. Santos. This was really an interesting look into the recent election and into relations between our two nations. For those of you joining us tonight, don't forget we've got an important program on June 23 with Mike Maybach talking about the Electoral College, how we elect our president here in the United States and how other republics elect their executives elsewhere in the world. And so don't forget to join us for all of our upcoming events. And Mr. Santos, I hope we'll see you again at something in the near future. So
okay, that sounds like a very interesting topic to listen to on the 23rd.
That one's in person, so it'll be at the Peoria Public Library North Branch in person.
Yeah.
But come on down to Peoria. I'm sure we would love to
think
see
about
you.
it seriously.
Good.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, and it's always good to kind of share news about my homeland. And I know it's just not being curious, but we have to be on the top of the news with the development over there, because it affects our economic and social life here in the United States. Well,
for certain. All right, everybody have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend.
Yes,
and
indeed.
good night.
Good night now.